Dave Chappelle never expected his meeting with Jim Carrey to leave such a lasting impression. For years, Carrey had been one of the biggest comedic forces in Hollywood, a performer whose energy felt almost unreal. His characters were loud, physical, unpredictable, and unforgettable. To millions of fans, he was more than just an actor. He was a phenomenon. But according to Chappelle, the man behind that image was far more complicated than people realized. When Dave finally met Jim Carrey during the filming of Man on the Moon, the encounter didn't unfold the way anyone expected. Instead of meeting the legendary comedian he admired, Chappelle found himself face-to-face with something entirely different. Jim Carrey wasn't acting like Jim Carrey at all. He had completely immersed himself in the role of Andy Kaufman, and according to everyone on set, Jim no longer existed during production. That strange encounter would later become one of the most talked-about stories connected to Carrey's intense personality and unpredictable approach to acting. But to understand why that moment felt so unsettling, you first have to understand where Jim Carrey came from. Long before Hollywood fame, Jim Carrey's life looked nothing like the glamorous world audiences would eventually associate with him. He was born James Eugene Carrey in Newmarket, Ontario, Canada, into a working-class Catholic family. His father Percy balanced accounting jobs while also chasing dreams of music, while his mother Kathleen stayed home, caring for the family. From an early age, Jim showed signs that he was different. Even as a child, he spent hours in front of mirrors, twisting his face into bizarre expressions and experimenting with impressions. Comedy wasn't simply entertainment to him. It became an escape. At just 10 years old, he famously wrote a letter to Carol Burnett claiming he had already mastered impressions and deserved a spot on her television show. That kind of confidence may have sounded ridiculous coming from a child, but deep down, Jim truly believed he was meant for something bigger. Unfortunately, life at home was becoming increasingly difficult. As the family struggled financially, stability slowly disappeared. They moved several times trying to stay afloat before eventually losing their home altogether. For a period of time, the Carrey family lived out of a Volkswagen van, while teenage Jim and his brother slept in a tent near Lake Ontario. Those experiences shaped him permanently. Eventually, Jim's father found work at a tire factory, but came with conditions. Jim and his brother were expected to work overnight janitorial and security shifts to help support the family. Night after night, they cleaned floors and worked exhausting hours before returning home completely drained. For many people, that kind of life would have buried any creative dream. But something inside Jim refused to let go. At 16 years old, he dropped out of school and committed himself fully to comedy. He started performing at clubs around Toronto while still balancing factory work. The dream remained distant, but he kept chasing it anyway. His first major attempt at stand-up comedy came in 1977 at a small Toronto comedy club called Yuck Yucks. Jim was only 15 years old and completely inexperienced. Dressed in a polyester suit chosen by his mother, he walked on stage hoping to impress the audience with impressions and safe material. Instead, he bombed badly. The audience wanted sharper, more mature comedy, and within minutes it became painfully obvious he wasn't ready. The experience shook his confidence deeply. For a while, it seemed possible that comedy might never work out for him. But Jim didn't quit. As time passed, he sharpened his act and slowly developed the unique physical comedy style that would later make him famous. By 1979, he returned to the stage with a completely different energy. The same clubs that once rejected him started noticing his talent. Soon, open mic appearances turned into paid gigs. At 17, Jim Carrey was already becoming one of the most talked-about young comedians in Canada. He chased bigger opportunities, auditioning for television shows and trying to break into sketch comedy. Success didn't arrive overnight. He auditioned for Saturday Night Live, but didn't get selected. He attempted to break into American television, but was repeatedly told to keep refining his act. Still, every setback only pushed him harder. Then everything started changing. A performance review in the Toronto Star praised him heavily and declared that a genuine new comedy star was emerging. That recognition opened doors almost immediately. Rodney Dangerfield noticed him and invited him on tour as an opening act, exposing Jim to larger audiences across North America. By the early 1990s, Jim Carrey exploded into superstardom. Movies like Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber transformed him into one of the biggest stars in the world. Audiences had never seen anyone quite like him before. His comedy was wild, elastic, and completely fearless. One hit followed another. Batman Forever, Liar Liar, The Cable Guy, and Bruce Almighty only strengthened his status. But eventually, Jim began searching for something deeper than comedy alone. That shift became obvious in films like The Truman Show and Man on the Moon. Critics suddenly realized that beneath the outrageous humor was a genuinely gifted dramatic actor. Then came Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a performance many still consider the finest work of his career. Quiet, emotional, and restrained, it showed audiences an entirely different side of Jim Carrey. But while his professional career soared, his personal life remained far more unstable. In 1993, his marriage to Melissa Womer ended, just as his fame was beginning to explode. According to later reports, the breakup blindsided her. She believed everything was stable until Jim left to film Ace Ventura. Around that same period, Jim became romantically involved with actress Lauren Holly, whom he later married after working together on Dumb and Dumber. But that marriage collapsed quickly as well, ending in divorce less than a year later. Holly later described the enormous pressure caused by constant paparazzi attention. Photographers invaded their privacy relentlessly, creating an atmosphere that made normal life almost impossible. Jim's later relationships followed similar patterns. His romance with Renee Zellweger appeared calm and grounded at first, but eventually ended because they wanted different things from life. Then came his highly public relationship with Jenny McCarthy, which lasted 5 years before ending quietly in 2010. People close to the couple described Jim as someone capable of intense warmth and deep emotional connection, but also someone who often pulled away unexpectedly. It created a complicated emotional dynamic that seemed difficult to maintain long-term. Then tragedy struck. In 2015, Jim's on-and-off girlfriend Catriona White died unexpectedly, triggering a painful public controversy. Lawsuits followed, accusing Jim of contributing to her struggles by allegedly providing prescription drugs. Carrey denied all accusations, calling the claims deeply unfair and emotionally devastating. Eventually, the lawsuits were dismissed, but the emotional damage remained. Over time, Jim Carrey began transforming in ways that surprised many people. He became deeply interested in painting and visual art, using it as therapy and emotional expression. What started as a hobby quickly evolved into serious artistic work. His paintings often carried strong political messages and sparked intense reactions online. Some praised his fearlessness, while others accused him of going too far. Controversy followed him elsewhere too. During his relationship with Jenny McCarthy, Jim became connected to anti-vaccine activism, supporting claims that vaccines were linked to autism despite overwhelming scientific evidence rejecting that theory. The backlash was immediate and severe. Yet perhaps the strangest chapter of Jim Carrey's life arrived during the filming of Man on the Moon. The film focused on comedian Andy Kaufman, one of the most unusual performers in entertainment history. To play Kaufman, Jim adopted an extreme method acting approach that blurred the line between reality and performance. According to people on set, Jim stopped behaving like himself entirely. He spoke as Andy Kaufman constantly. He acted like Andy. He demanded others treat him as Andy. Even between scenes, there was no separation between the actor and the role. That was the environment Dave Chappelle walked into. Chappelle later explained that he arrived expecting to finally meet Jim Carrey, someone he respected deeply as a comedian. Instead, Norm Macdonald introduced him to Andy Kaufman. At first, Dave assumed it was a joke, but quickly, he realized nobody was breaking character. Jim remained fully committed to the role, and everyone around him played along as if Andy Kaufman had literally returned to life. To Chappelle, the experience became deeply uncomfortable. He could clearly see Jim Carrey standing in front of him, yet everyone on set insisted on pretending otherwise. What should have been a normal interaction turned into hours of awkward conversations, with someone refusing to acknowledge reality. Later, Dave described the moment with humor, but underneath the jokes was visible disappointment. He had admired Jim Carrey for years and expected to meet the real person behind the legendary performances. Instead, he met a character. Even Jim himself later admitted how extreme the process became. He explained that while filming Man on the Moon, he felt like Jim Carrey disappeared completely. Andy Kaufman had taken over. For some people, that level of dedication represented artistic genius. For others, it crossed into something unsettling. Director Chris Smith later reflected on how difficult it became to understand where Jim ended and the performance began. Moments of the real Jim occasionally surfaced, but they rarely lasted long before the Kaufman persona returned. Looking back, Chappelle's reaction suddenly makes more sense. The encounter wasn't simply awkward. It was the moment where admiration collided with reality. Dave expected to meet a comedy icon. Instead, he encountered someone so deeply consumed by performance that even ordinary human interaction became impossible. And maybe that's the strange truth about Jim Carrey. For decades, audiences watched him transform into unforgettable characters with incredible intensity. But somewhere along the way, the line between performance and identity may have blurred more than anyone realized. That's what continues to fascinate people about him today. Behind the laughter, behind the energy, and behind the wildly expressive face that made millions laugh, there's always been another side to Jim Carrey. Quieter, darker, unpredictable, and deeply complicated. And according to Dave Chappelle, seeing that side up close changed the way he viewed Jim forever.